I've been into apologetics for almost a decade, and when I first started out, I went about it in all of the wrong ways. And though I did have a heart of somewhat good intentions, I couldn't wait to tell people why they were wrong. I've learned a lot through these years of discussions, and I also need to remind myself of these 5 big mistakes that we make in apologetics. I hope this is helpful for your discussions too. Welcome to All That Catholic Stuff. I'm Chris Bray. The word apologetics means reasoned arguments, or simply put, to make a defense. And in our world today, we need to defend the truths of our faith. You've probably witnessed these obnoxious internet posts that are belittling and obnoxious and exaggerated and long and drawn out, objecting to some kind of truth. And if you're like me, perhaps you've realized that those tactics aren't very effective or fruitful. If we want to be effective in apologetics, I would suggest that we need to avoid these 5 major pitfalls, these 5 major mistakes in doing apologetics. Number 1, forgetting charity. You're not trying to win an argument. Rather, we're pursuing truth together, collectively. Avoid inflammatory language and anger and condescension and malice and passive aggressive remarks like, any idiot with a brain wouldn't believe that. Those types of remarks. Instead, we should meet them with virtue through compassion and calmness and gentleness. 1 Peter 3:15 reminds us to always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks us to give an account of the hope that is in us. But we usually forget the next part of that passage, which is, but do it with gentleness and reverence. If we don't have love, then we're just like a noisy gong or clanging cymbal. Nobody's gonna wanna listen to us, no matter how true the facts are that we are trying to present to them. Mistake number 2 is not listening. How do we know where to meet people at if we haven't listened to them? Ask questions. I love asking questions. I love to just thoroughly understand people's objections, to be able to articulate it so that I can really sympathize with their position and so that I know how to address the issue that they're really struggling with. I was in a conversation with someone for probably 45 minutes talking about the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist when I finally realized that they were agnostic. Like they didn't even believe in God per se, and I wasted that whole time addressing something that actually wasn't really their issue. But if I would have just listened, and if I would have just asked some questions, then I could have been able to meet them where they're at. St. Thomas Aquinas was really good at being able to listen to his opponents and to be able to articulate their argument in a fair and concise way. I think a lot of times what we do is we want to make these straw man arguments. We want to weaken the other person's argument so that we can knock it down. And that's a terrible way to do apologetics. It's not fair to the other person, and it demonstrates that we're not actually in it to pursue truth, but we're in it to win an argument. Instead, what we can do is spend most of our time just asking questions. And what I have found personally in my own life is if I just ask enough questions, usually the other person is not only more open to pursue truth, but they often tend to see the unreasonableness of their own position. Apologetics mistake number 3 is information overload. Even a well-intentioned person will get into a discussion with somebody and then just want to give them everything. Like they're going to dump 20 gigs of data on them, all the podcasts and all the YouTube videos and all the ebooks and everything at their disposal. But that's not a very good way to do apologetics, especially when it's unsolicited. Giving tons and tons of information is usually not very helpful. And here's the thing is we live in the information age. At our fingertips on our smartphone, we can get access to an enormous amount of information. Information is not the problem. We have access to it. It's providing the right information, the relevant information that people are going to find compelling. This is why listening is so important, so that we can give the appropriate information in bite-sized tidbits so that people will be able to receive it and reflect on it and be able to ration it within their minds and respond appropriately. Instead of doing a big data dump, perhaps what we can do is we can share from our personal experience. Why do we find this personally compelling? Why do we find this information so persuasive? Maybe we can share a perspective from our own life and our own faith journey that might help this other person understand its relevance. Let's communicate information in a way that is relevant and relatable. Apologetics mistake number 4 is not being relational. I think sometimes we forget that our opponent is a human being created by God and loved by Him. They're a person. What we tend to do is we vilify them and we only see them as their argument. We only see them as the truth that they profess to believe. We're often fooled into thinking that if I just respond with a quick whim with the right Bible verse or the book reference or YouTube video, that we will win the argument. But apologetics in relational ministry is more about a journey. It's not just going to be a quick discussion and it's done and over, but it's a journey towards truth where you accompany the other person, where you wrestle these realities with them. Many people spend a lot of time doing apologetics online, and I have as well. And it's a great place to reach so many people. But I also find it extremely ineffective. Like, though I'm having discussions with thousands of people, I have no idea if any of that information is actually transformative in their life. I think we underestimate that one of the most powerful and transformative ways that we can influence other people is in real life, in person, and the people around us in our own lives, our friends, our family members, our neighbors, our coworkers. And so if you're dialoguing with a friend or family member or somebody online, see if you can take that offline. Say, hey, can we meet for coffee? I'd love to discuss this with you more. I'd love to hear your perspective a bit more. And let's be generous with them. Let's buy them a meal. Let's buy them a coffee. Let's spend time with them and really understand where they're coming from. Let's not underestimate the significant impact of real life relational ministry. The mindset of always being right or knowing it all is about as opposite of a relational ministry as possible. Like, some of the most brilliant minds that I've ever heard speak are also some of the most humble people on the planet. The reality is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So instead, perhaps what we can do is bring our discussion into the real world. Let's take it offline and let's be generous with them. Let's be humble and compassionate and remember that this is a journey. This isn't just about winning a quick 3-minute argument, but it's journeying with the other person in pursuit of truth. Mistake number 5 in apologetics is neglecting the Holy Spirit. Oftentimes we think that it's all up to us and that we have to do it on our own. Perhaps we carry the burden of thinking that we have to convince them, that we have to present all of the right facts in the right order and communicate it in the best possible way. But it's not our job to convert the other person. That's actually the job of the Holy Spirit. All that God really requires and asks of us is that we would surrender ourselves in that moment, so that we would be present and say yes to Him for whatever way He wants for us to be in service of Him. That might be actually to not say anything at all. The reality is not everyone is ready to hear the truth. Not everyone is willing to accept it. Not everyone is that fertile soil where the seed of faith will be able to blossom. And that's just not the case. I've had times in my own life when I wasn't ready or willing to receive hard truths. And that's okay, because we believe in a God who's merciful and also has an infinite amount of patience with us and invites us to show that to others as well. Perhaps maybe what we need to do is to take our efforts to more fertile soil so that we can allow these seeds to be nurtured and to start to bear fruit in other people's lives. Instead of trying to micromanage God and to do everything all on our own, perhaps what we need to do is to say a prayer. Let's invite God into this discussion. And in fact, whenever I'm talking with somebody else about these things that I know that we disagree on, I like to start the discussion in prayer, because I don't want to have to rely on my knowledge base and the facts that I've accumulated over my own life. I want to rely on what the Holy Spirit is telling me in that moment, which might be completely different from the repository of apologetics and Bible verses and documents of church fathers across history. Let's ask the Holy Spirit for help. And we remember that Moses, though he had reluctance to go and speak with Pharaoh, God said that He would give him the words to speak. And He will give us the words as well, if we are willing and we are open to receive that. So let's trust in Him, that though we might be flawed and imperfect, that's who He chooses to use. And here's the other reality, this burden that we don't need to carry, is that when Jesus was here on earth, God Himself did not get everyone to follow Him. Like in John chapter 6, He had thousands of people following Him, asking Him questions, and at the end of His discourse, they all walked away, except a few of the disciples. Like, if God Himself did not get everyone to follow after Him, we don't need to carry the burden, thinking that it is our job to convince the world all on our own. The Holy Spirit is the one who convicts minds and hearts. And it's simply our job to show up and say, yes, God, here I am. It can be really easy to allow emotion to rule an argument and to neglect charity, to try and do everything all on our own. But let's strive to share the faith with gentleness and reverence. Let's check our hearts before we comment and before we share and before we open our mouths, so that we can be sure that what we're doing is in love and charity of somebody else. If you found this video helpful, I'd be so grateful if you would consider subscribing, liking it, sharing it with somebody else who might benefit from it. And I'd be so grateful if you would consider supporting my ministry at patreon.com/Chris Bray. Thanks so much, and God bless you.